Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, you may hear the spinny thing humming just under what I'm saying, and that's because I've had to push the camera all the way in because this is a 15mm figure. This fella, he is from Imitation of Life Miniatures, and he is a print that I've done at home, but there are also Etsy stores and what have you online. Just got to do a little bit of Google foo for those. I'll make sure there's a link in the description to where you can pick up the files though. Now what I'm going to do today is really have just a little bit of fun. The method here is not going to change all that much depending on what colors you're using. It's really about big, chunky, bold highlights that are visible at table distance, which means pushing the camera in this close is probably no use to demonstrating that at all, but hey-ho. Anyhow, all of the paints will be listed in the description below, the same as always, so let's get started. So to start off with, I've hit him with a quick primer spray of Brainmatter Beige. Now because this fellow's going to be predominantly light colours, I'm going to recommend any bone to white colour will work fine here. White, if you've got it, will be perfectly acceptable because we're going to do something in 2 seconds which is going to make that beigey finish really kind of pointless. I just happened to have Brainmatter Beige in my hand when I went outside. So what I've mixed up first of all is actually half and half strong skin shade and Speedpaint Medium from the Army Painter. And I think you'll see why. The object of this is to make sure that any bits that we sort of miss with our painting are still going to have a nice brown shade in there. So don't worry too much, nothing's going to glow in the recesses. You can use this neat if you would prefer. If you do, once it's dried, I'd suggest go over it with a quick white dry brush to brighten up some of those areas. And yeah, don't let it pull anywhere too heavily, but don't worry if it does leave things a little bit stained. Likewise, you could also use strong tone here if that's what you've got. I just recommend the strong skin shade because it's got a little bit of warmth to it, which is going to work nicely with the colors that I plan to use. So over everything, and then we'll let this dry. Now, ordinarily, I tend to start with skin, or whatever is going to be the lowest level on the miniature. But this time I'm going to do things a little bit different and actually start with his cape, which it might seem a little back to front, but because of this wee bit here, it's going to be easiest to get in and start by painting that, so I can tidy up with other stuff as I go. I'm using here Wyvern Fury, and this is going to cover pretty well over our white, although I may have thinned it down just a little too much there. All the same, just a quick blast around all of our cape. Now when you're coming near to areas that are going to meet, rather than completely covering the cape here, what I'm going to do is try and leave a little bit of that shaded stuff in the recess, so I don't really have to fuss and come back to do anything more with it. Some areas it's going to be a little more difficult to do that than others, but concentrate on the bits that are facing your opponent, generally speaking. Okay, now we're going to paint in his skin. I'm going to use Moonstone skin as the base coat here, and I'm going to be going a little bit darker for most of my base coats, because what I want is quite a high contrast between the lower parts of the miniature and what will be the high parts when we highlight them. Now, as you'll see, I'm actually using a relatively large brush. This is a size 3. But because it's still got a decent tip on it, paint's going to end up where I want. And I think folks tend to go immediately to the smallest brush you can find, and it's not always going to be the easiest brush to use. As long as you keep your paint thin, size or 2 bigger than you might expect, basically lets you keep painting for a while longer. You don't have to keep going back to your paint to load up again. But in saying that, sometimes you do want a thinner brush with a nice fine tip, because generally it's when you're getting into somewhere that you don't want to hit the sides of what you're doing. So to demonstrate, I've got some pure red, and I'm going to try and paint the slashes in his coat and the part of his trousers without hitting the sides. It doesn't matter too much if I do hit the bits that I want to be white later, because of course we can tidy them up. But if I take a little bit of time here, it'll save us a job later. Now there are a couple of tiny bits where I've splurged over the edges, but I'm not too unhappy with that. I'm going to go back up to my larger brush now, and we'll use gunmetal to base coat his armor. Now this, again, the tip on the brush is really more of the point, no pun intended, though it would have been really funny if it was. I'm going to be relatively careful as I come near the bits that are going to be leather and what have you, though to be honest, you don't really have to. I'm just being a bit fussy today. I did finally remember his feathers, and I went back with some pure red to base coat those, but otherwise, most of the metal stuff is done as well. Now for leather, I prefer a slightly warmer sort of finish than leather brown would give us. So what I have instead here in my hand, this is oak brown. I'm going to paint in the straps, and I might do his boots in this as well. I don't actually, no, I won't. I'm going to do his boots a different color, but for now, these straps and little bits of wooden stuff hanging from his belt, I'm going to go ahead and base coat with oak brown. It is really tricky to keep a guy this size in camera. And I'll take a little bit of leather brown and paint in his hat. I just like the idea of this being a bit lighter than the other stuff. So while it is technically leather brown, this has more of a sort of a felt sort of color to it compared to the other colors I've been using. Now, bootstrap brown is going to be my go-to for wooden details, and there's a couple of these on this fella. The pistol, obviously, but there's also a little spyglass hanging down on his... Wait, no, that's another pistol. Oh, well, I'm going to paint that... I'm going to paint that the right color then. I thought it was a spyglass, gosh. Now for any little pouches or satchels or what have you that obviously aren't leather, I've got here paratrooper tan. We're going through quite a lot of these browns at the moment, but this is going to be a highlight color later as well, so it's going to be a little bit more utility out of this one. And then what I've got is weapon bronze, and I'll let you guess what this is going to go on. The weapons, but as well I'm going to use this as the sort of brassy color for any belt buckles that I don't want to be silver, which, because there's quite a lot of silver on them already, I think I'm going to do all of the buckles in bronze. Just break up the colors on them a little bit, because on a larger figure, it wouldn't matter too much if these were silver or a different silver, but for the visual language at his sort of scale, I think it's going to look better to have them a different color. And then the last base coat for most of these guys is going to be any facial hair. So I'm going to use deep gray on this fella for his tash. It does not matter what you use. The last thing I'm then going to do is tidy up the skull here with a little bit of Brainmatter Beige. And then it'll be ready for a couple of washes. So now what I'm going to do is take some strong tone, and this time I haven't actually thinned it down. I'm going to use it neat. So I'm actually going to paint it quite carefully onto the miniature, rather than just bucketing it on and letting gravity sort it out. The only thing I'm going to avoid with this is the white clothing, or the Brainmatter Beige clothing, because we're going to come back and do a little highlighting with that. It doesn't need to be any darker than it already is. But everything else, take your time, and rather than just slapping this on, spend a bit of time guiding it into the places where it needs to be. And if you get any big clumps, same as always, just shift it before it starts drying. So over everything except the clothes, let's get a look at what this fella looks like in about half an hour when all this has dried. Now once it's dried, we've got plenty of shading. There's a bit of visual interest in most of those colors. Yeah, it's looking pretty cool. As always, you could chuck them on the table like this, but let's keep going, make them look a little more interesting. The first thing I'm going to do is, because the fact those washes we've used dry a little bit shiny, I'm actually going to take them outside and hit them with a matte varnish spray. First of all, it's going to dull down that shine, it'll look a little more realistic, and secondly, it will be easier to see what I'm doing on the camera. And after a bit of leather brown on his hat, I'm also going to go back to that paratrooper tan again, and just pop little bits right at the edges, because the hat being a focal point of the miniature, I want it to be a little bit more interesting to look at. So just like this, nice quick slashes of colour, easy as. Now for his boots and his belts, what I have here is Dryad Brown. And this is quite a jump, so you want to be relatively sparing with it towards the edges. The idea here is what we're using this for is to frame areas of colour rather than really highlight them. So the idea is that the eye then catches these, spots those highlights, and it helps build the shape so you don't really have to guess what you're looking at. Might sound crazy, but once you've got a few of these guys on the table and you're standing a good 300 feet or so away from them in scale terms, it's going to be much easier to see who is who. Now again, we're going to go back to that Brainmatter Beige, and I'm really going to highlight this in 2 steps. For the larger, flatter areas of his trousers and what have you, and his shirt, I'm going to quite quickly use the big brush to block in these shapes and get rid of some of the grubbiness. But when it comes to highlighting the actual shirt, what I'm going to do is pop on down to my smaller brush so that I've got a bit more control. Now if you want a sharp highlight there, you may even go up to white. I've got Barbarian Flesh though, and I'll let you guess what we're painting there. The easiest thing to do with this stuff is just grab his nose, his chin, and if you got a fine enough tip on your brush, you can give him a funky little bum chin. Doing his brows, and I'm going to use this as well to do his cheekbones and the backs of his knuckles. This is now getting into the realm of being a little bit fuzzy, but it does look cool, so worth practicing. Now if you opt not to give the cloak the strong tone shade, you could instead here use pure red, but I'm going to use dragon red and add a little bit more shape to some of the areas. This really starts getting into the realm of stylizing how you like your capes to look. But as much as possible, you're trying to accentuate the flow of the cape. So think about the way it would move and try and add a few lines to help sell that. Now I'm going to grab here some plate mail metal, and with this we're going to try and accentuate the shape of some of the armor and the weapons. So just little bits at the edges. And this is one of the reasons why doing the varnish before the highlights is actually quite useful at this scale, because this means our little metallic highlights get to keep their shine, so they'll stand out a bit more at the distance. Then finally, with some true brass, I'm just going to dot in at the very edges of the brassy bits, because this is a very bright silvery sort of color. Now, what I'm going to do after this, I might pop a little bit of uniform grey onto his mustache. I'm undecided, but I am going to go ahead and base him up. And I'll pop the recipe for that in the description, because it's going to be nice and simple today. So, relatively quick job with this fella. Let's get a look at what he looks like when we're all finished.
And so, there at last, our teeny tiny Mordheim style captain is complete. I had a lot of fun doing this. It is possible to waste way more time than you would expect on 15mm figures. I think you probably saw a couple of points at which I could quite happily have stopped. And on the table, he would look the same as that little bit of extra effort has made him look for the cameras, but that's half the fun of painting, isn't it? Is not knowing when to say when. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.